Carl Jung believed that the greatest transformations in life often do not come from striving or forcing, but from allowing. He saw that the human psyche is like a river. The more we thrash against its current, the more exhausted we become. Yet when we allow ourselves to float, something mysterious happens. The river begins to carry us to where we were meant to be all along. This was not laziness in Jung's eyes, but a form of surrender to the deeper wisdom of the unconscious. Jung noticed that people who were constantly struggling to control every outcome were the ones who suffered most. Their lives were filled with anxiety and tension because they could never trust the larger process unfolding around them. He often wrote about the tension between the conscious will and the unconscious forces that guide us from below the surface. To Jung, the unconscious was not just a storage of forgotten memories or repressed fears. It was a living system of intelligence, older and wiser than the individual ego. To live fully meant learning to listen to it rather than fighting it. This is why Jung placed such importance on the concept of synchronicity. He described synchronicity as meaningful coincidences, those strange alignments that happen without any rational cause but feel charged with significance. When a person stops forcing and begins to observe, these events start to appear like guiding lights. For Jung, synchronicities were not accidents. They were signs that the psyche and the world outside were in harmony, reflecting one another. And such harmony could not be forced. It could only be witnessed when one stepped back and allowed life to move on its own. Jung was deeply influenced by Eastern philosophy, particularly Taoism. In Taoist thought, there is a concept called Wu Wei, often translated as effortless action. It is the art of doing without doing, of allowing the natural flow of life to move through you rather than against you. Jung saw in Wu Wei a mirror of his own ideas. He recognized that the Western mind, obsessed with progress and achievement, often overlooked the wisdom of stillness. For him, true power was not in endless effort but in deep alignment with what was already unfolding. When Jung worked with patients, he noticed that breakthroughs often came not during moments of frantic effort but in periods of pause. A dream would reveal an answer, or a chance encounter would shift a person's perspective. Healing was not something one could force like a machine. It required patience, openness, and a willingness to let the unconscious do its slow work. This was a radical idea, because modern society taught people to always be busy, always be in control, always be pushing forward. Jung reminded us that such constant striving can cut us off from the very currents that would guide us if only we stopped resisting. To do nothing after a moment of deep reflection is not avoidance. It is respect for the hidden processes at work. Imagine a seed buried in soil. You cannot pull at it to make it grow faster. You must leave it alone, trust the soil, the rain, the rhythm of the seasons. Jung believed our inner lives functioned in the same way. The unconscious needs time to gestate, to rearrange itself, to bring forward what is needed in its own season. Our task is not to demand immediate results but to be patient enough to let them ripen. This approach does not mean passivity. Jung was not telling people to abandon responsibility or to float aimlessly. Instead, he was teaching that there are times when action must give way to receptivity. In those times, stepping back can be the most courageous act of all. Because stepping back requires trust. It requires faith that there is an intelligence beyond the ego, beyond the mind that insists it knows best. Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming whole. Individuation was not about forcing the self into an ideal shape. It was about allowing the self to reveal what it already was beneath the layers of conditioning. In his writings and lectures, Jung often told stories of patients who found healing only when they stopped trying so hard to fix themselves. A man who could not break free from anxiety finally learned to sit quietly with his dreams and discovered they carried messages he had been too restless to hear. A woman who struggled with relationships found meaning in a recurring synchronicity that pointed her toward unresolved conflicts with her own shadow. In each case, transformation began not when they pushed harder, but when they stopped and listened. This is the paradox at the heart of Jung's teaching. By doing nothing, everything begins to shift. By loosening the grip, life begins to realign. The more one insists on control, the more tangled the knots become. But the moment of surrender allows the knots to unravel on their own. Jung once wrote that people do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And often, the darkness reveals itself only in the quiet when we have finally stopped forcing and allowed silence to speak. The invitation here is simple but profound. After you have reflected, after you have made space for the unconscious to rise, do nothing. Step back. Watch how events around you begin to mirror the inner work. Watch how coincidences, encounters, and dreams begin to line up. This is not magic. It is the deep harmony between the psyche and the world, a harmony that becomes visible only when we stop interfering. Jung's entire philosophy of stepping back rests on his profound respect for mystery. He understood that life is not a problem to be solved but a mystery to be lived. When we rush to solve everything, we rob ourselves of the depth that comes only from patience and silence. He saw in his patience a hunger to reduce every experience into a neat explanation, but he knew the psyche resists being boxed in. To him, what mattered most was not the quick answer but the slow unfolding of meaning. This is why he spent so much time exploring dreams. A dream is not something you can interpret with force. It speaks in its own language, through images and symbols that rise unbidden from the unconscious. Jung believed that if you wait with a dream rather than dissect it too quickly, it begins to work on you. The image stays with you, shaping your thoughts, tugging at your emotions, guiding you in ways you cannot predict. To let a dream live inside you without rushing to decode it was, for Jung, a form of doing nothing. And in that nothing, transformation was already happening. He extended this insight to the way people approach life itself. Too often, he said, we treat life like a riddle we must crack with effort. But life, like a dream, has to be held lightly. If you demand an immediate answer, you strangle its living mystery. If you hold it patiently, it begins to reveal itself in layers, in whispers, in small moments that gather power over time. Jung understood that this rhythm mirrors nature itself. The tree does not rush its growth. The river does not force its path. They unfold in time, guided by currents deeper than any conscious plan. Jung's notion of the shadow also reflects this need for patience. The shadow is everything within us that we deny or repress. Many people believe they can conquer their shadow through willpower, by forcing themselves into goodness. But Jung warned that this only deepens the split. To integrate the shadow, you must allow it to speak. You must sit with it in silence, listening to the parts of yourself you most want to avoid. This listening is uncomfortable, but it is also healing. By doing nothing more than allowing the shadow to exist in your awareness, you begin to reclaim it. The process unfolds naturally, not through control but through acknowledgement. This patience extends beyond the individual to the world itself. Jung lived through 2 world wars. He saw firsthand what happens when nations try to dominate and control through sheer force. He wrote about the collective unconscious, the shared field of symbols and instincts that connects humanity. When this collective energy is ignored or suppressed, it erupts in violence. Jung believed that the path to peace could not come from constant political maneuvering alone. It required an inner shift, a willingness to step back from the frenzy of control and allow deeper reconciliation to emerge. The same principle that heals the individual's psyche, he believed, could heal the world. One of the most remarkable things about Jung is that he was never satisfied with shallow comfort. He knew that waiting, that doing nothing, often feels unbearable. The ego wants progress, wants certainty, wants results. Yet he urged his students and patients to endure this discomfort. He called it holding the tension of the opposites. Instead of rushing to resolve contradictions, he encouraged people to sit within them. To do nothing but hold both sides in awareness, trusting that in time a new synthesis would emerge. This was not passivity, but courage. It demanded strength to resist the impulse to force a premature solution. Jung often described individuation, the journey of becoming whole, as a spiral rather than a straight line. We return to the same themes, the same struggles, again and again, but each time at a deeper level. To fight this spiral, to demand a quick conclusion, is to cut short the very growth that is trying to take place. By doing nothing, by letting the spiral carry us, we eventually find ourselves transformed in ways no deliberate effort could achieve. The beauty of this teaching is that it applies not only to great life crises but to the smallest moments. A conversation that does not resolve, a dream that remains unclear, a season of uncertainty in work or love. Our impulse is to push, to demand clarity, to solve. But Jung whispers otherwise. Let it be. Allow it to breathe. Trust that the unconscious is at work, even if you cannot see its movements. In time, the threads will weave together into a pattern you could never have forced on your own. In this way, doing nothing is not the absence of life but the deepest participation in it. It is recognizing that the psyche, the world, and the flow of existence are already moving toward balance. Our role is not to force the river but to enter it with trust, letting it carry us toward the sea. When Jung spoke of surrendering to the flow of life, he was not suggesting an escape from responsibility. He was pointing toward a deeper kind of responsibility, one that involves listening to what life itself is asking of us. To live only from the surface mind is to act without roots, like a tree shaken by every gust of wind. But when we allow silence and stillness, when we do nothing and let the unconscious speak, we begin to act from a place that is anchored in depth. This depth is what Jung called the self, the totality of who we are, far greater than the fragile ego. The self cannot be reached by forcing. It emerges slowly, like a figure rising from mist. Jung described how people often encountered it first in dreams or symbols, as an image of wholeness. Sometimes it appeared as a wise figure, sometimes as a circle, a mandala, or a unifying vision. These were not inventions of the mind, but spontaneous messages from the deeper psyche. And the way to receive them was through patience, not struggle. The ego might demand to know everything at once, but the self gives its gifts in its own time. Doing nothing creates the space where those gifts can enter. This space is essential because the ego, by its nature, wants control. It wants to impose order and meaning on everything immediately. Jung saw this as one of the main causes of neurosis. The more we insist that life must look a certain way, the more life resists. The more we cling to control, the more the unconscious fights back, sending symptoms, anxieties, and breakdowns. Jung's answer was not to tighten control further but to release it. By allowing, by stepping back, by entering silence, the tension softens and the unconscious begins to cooperate rather than resist. He illustrated this with the alchemical image of the vessel. In alchemy, transformation could only occur when the ingredients were left inside a sealed vessel, undisturbed, subjected to heat and time. Jung saw this as a metaphor for the psyche. When you hold a problem in the container of awareness without trying to fix it immediately, it begins to transform itself. Just as the alchemical gold emerges through slow process, the psyche too reveals its hidden treasures when allowed to ripen in silence. Doing nothing here means maintaining the vessel, resisting the impulse to open it too soon, trusting that a greater process is at work. This principle is not easy to live. In moments of crisis, everything in us cries out for action. We want to repair, to force, to control. Jung understood this temptation, but he also understood its danger. When we rush to fix, we often deepen the wound. We act from fear rather than wisdom. But when we wait, when we let the unconscious contribute its part, we often find that new possibilities emerge, possibilities we could never have designed on our own. The doing nothing is not empty. It is active receptivity. It is allowing the self to enter and guide. Jung often emphasized that life is not linear. It is symbolic, circular, and filled with rhythms we cannot measure. This is why he was fascinated by mandalas, those intricate circular designs that appeared spontaneously in his patient's art and dreams. To him, the mandala symbolized the natural movement of the psyche toward balance and wholeness. No one could force a mandala to appear. It arose on its own, when the time was right, as a reflection of inner harmony. This was another lesson in trust. Do nothing, and the deeper patterns begin to reveal themselves. One of the most powerful aspects of Jung's teaching is how it validates uncertainty. In modern culture, uncertainty is treated as failure. We are taught to always have an answer, always know what to do. Jung reminded us that uncertainty is not weakness but the ground where transformation begins. By doing nothing in the face of uncertainty, by resisting the impulse to grasp for premature answers, we give space for the real answer to grow. That answer, when it arrives, is more than intellectual. It comes with a sense of inevitability, as though it had been waiting for us all along. To live in this way requires humility. Jung knew that the ego does not like humility. It wants to be the master, the one in control. But he saw humility as the doorway to wisdom. Doing nothing after reflection is an act of humility, a way of admitting that there are forces greater than our conscious will. It is trusting that life knows something we do not. And in that trust, a new kind of strength emerges, not the brittle strength of control, but the quiet strength of alignment with something vast. In time, this practice of allowing begins to reshape the way we see life itself. Instead of endless struggle, life becomes a dialogue. Instead of a battlefield, it becomes a field of symbols and synchronicities, each pointing us toward wholeness. Jung's message is that the psyche is always moving toward healing, always guiding us, if only we allow it the silence to speak. Do nothing after the work of reflection. Hold the question, the uncertainty, the tension. Watch how life itself begins to weave the answer, often through means you could never have forced. In this waiting, in this patience, in this surrender, everything slowly falls into place. For Jung, the art of doing nothing was not only a path to healing but also the foundation of creativity. He often said that the deepest works of art, the most powerful ideas, and the most meaningful discoveries do not come from the ego's effort alone. They emerge from the unconscious, like water rising from a hidden spring. To access that spring, one must first become quiet. One must wait. This waiting is not idle but receptive, an openness that allows the imagination to unfold on its own terms. Jung himself experienced this during his own period of inner crisis, when visions and dreams overwhelmed him. Instead of suppressing them or forcing them into rational explanations, he chose to record them patiently. He painted images, wrote dialogues, and allowed the unconscious to reveal itself. These explorations eventually became the foundation of his Red Book, one of the most important records of his inner life. He did not plan it, and he did not push it into existence. He allowed it to emerge. By doing nothing but listening, he tapped into a creative depth that shaped all his later work. This principle applies to love as well. Jung observed that relationships often collapse under the weight of control. When one partner demands constant answers, immediate reassurance, or total predictability, the relationship suffocates. Love, he believed, requires space. It requires the patience to let another person unfold in their own time. By doing nothing in moments of tension, by not rushing to control, to force, to demand, something deeper has a chance to grow. In this stillness, trust builds. The unconscious of one person begins to communicate with the unconscious of another, creating a bond that goes beyond words. Jung also connected this idea to meaning itself. Many people came to him asking what the purpose of life was, desperate for clarity. He never offered a single formula, because he knew that meaning cannot be imposed. It must grow out of experience. By doing nothing after reflection, by allowing silence and uncertainty, a person begins to notice small signs, coincidences, and moments of alignment. These are not random. They are the threads of meaning, weaving themselves into a pattern. Meaning is discovered, not manufactured, and it appears when we stop forcing it to appear. In this sense, doing nothing is an act of faith in the psyche's natural movement toward wholeness. Jung compared it to the way a wound heals. You cannot command a wound to close. You can only create the right conditions and then let the body do its work. The psyche is the same. It has its own intelligence, its own rhythm of repair. The ego's role is to create space, to protect the vessel, and then to wait. The real work is done in the unseen depths, where the unconscious reshapes itself. This waiting is not always comfortable. Jung was clear about that. The unconscious can bring up images and feelings that are unsettling. Silence often confronts us with shadows we have long avoided. Doing nothing means facing these shadows without immediately running from them. It means holding the discomfort until its message begins to reveal itself. Jung believed that only by facing these hidden aspects could a person become whole. The act of waiting, of not rushing to escape, is the act of giving the shadow space to transform. As this practice deepens, life begins to feel different. Instead of being driven by fear and urgency, one begins to notice rhythms and patterns. The ordinary becomes symbolic. A dream carries guidance. A conversation feels charged with meaning. A delay, which once would have been frustrating, is now seen as part of a larger unfolding. Doing nothing becomes a way of living with more presence, more trust, and more attunement to the mysterious order of existence. Jung knew that modern culture struggled with this idea. In a world obsessed with speed, efficiency, and achievement, doing nothing can look like failure. But he insisted that it was the opposite. He warned that endless striving only leads to emptiness, because it cuts us off from the unconscious, from the deep sources of renewal. True progress, he said, comes from alignment, not force. To live in harmony with the psyche is to live in harmony with life itself. And when you begin to live this way, something extraordinary happens. Creativity blossoms in unexpected ways. Love deepens, not through control but through openness. Meaning arises naturally, weaving itself into your days. What once felt fragmented begins to feel whole. Jung's message is clear. After reflection, after listening, let go. Do nothing. Watch how life itself begins to create through you, in you, and around you. Jung's vision of surrender was not passive resignation. It was an active alignment with the mystery of life. To do nothing after reflection is to enter into partnership with the unconscious, with the greater self, and with the hidden order of the world. It is a recognition that we are not solitary fragments, struggling against chaos, but parts of a living pattern that holds us. This recognition changes everything. At the heart of Jung's teaching is individuation, the slow, lifelong journey of becoming whole. He described it as the unfolding of the true self beneath the masks of the ego. Individuation cannot be rushed. It cannot be forced into shape by sheer willpower. It unfolds like dawn breaking across the horizon. Doing nothing is the space that allows this dawn to rise. The more you step back, the more the hidden light of the self begins to reveal itself. This is why Jung returns so often to the image of the circle, the mandala. For him, it was the symbol of completion, the reflection of a psyche that has found balance. He noticed that people on the path of individuation often began to draw mandalas without knowing why. It was as though the unconscious itself was guiding them toward wholeness. These images could not be manufactured by the ego. They emerged when the person created space, when they waited and allowed. In that waiting, something greater was already at work. Jung believed that the greatest obstacle to wholeness was the restless demand for certainty. The ego fears uncertainty because it cannot control it. Yet uncertainty is the very soil in which transformation grows. By doing nothing in the face of uncertainty, by holding it patiently, we give the unconscious permission to weave its own solution. Over time, clarity arises, not as a forced answer but as a natural revelation. And when it comes, it carries a weight, a truth, that no premature solution could ever have. This surrender is not only about the inner life. Jung saw it mirrored in nature, in history, and in the world. He wrote that humanity's crises often come from trying to impose too much control, ignoring the deeper forces moving beneath. Just as an individual must surrender to the unconscious, so too must a culture learn to pause, to reflect, to allow. The same wisdom that heals a person can heal the world, but only if we trust that life has intelligence beyond our grasp. When you look back at your own life, you may notice this truth already. The most important shifts often happen not when you force them, but when you finally let go. The friendship that changed you, the love that arrived unexpectedly, the opportunity that appeared when you had stopped searching. These were not created by effort alone. They came when you allowed space. Jung would say they were guided by the self, moving beneath the surface, arranging life in ways the ego could never predict. To live this way is to live with trust. It is to see life not as a problem to be solved but as a dialogue with the unseen. Every dream, every coincidence, every delay or silence may hold meaning. By doing nothing, you give life the chance to speak in its own voice. By waiting, you let the unconscious reveal what the conscious mind could never invent. And so the teaching is both simple and profound. After reflection, after listening deeply, do nothing. Step back. Trust. Watch how the knots begin to loosen, how the symbols begin to appear, how the people and events around you begin to align. This is not passivity. It is faith in the wholeness that is already at work within you and around you. Jung's ultimate vision was that each of us carries within a spark of the greater whole, and that by surrendering, we allow this spark to grow into flame. Wholeness is not achieved by control. It is revealed by trust. Do nothing, and watch how everything falls into place.